I want you to forget everything you think you know about birth months and horoscopes and personality tests, and every system that has ever tried to put you in category, and hand you a label and tell you that the label explains you. Forget all of it, because what I am about to share with you is older than any of those systems, older than astrology, older than personality psychology, older than any organized attempt by the human mind to understand itself. What I am about to share with you comes from something Carl Jung spent the second half of his extraordinary life trying to articulate: the understanding that certain fundamental patterns of human experience are not learned. They are not chosen. They are not the product of environment or upbringing or circumstance. They arrive with you. They are present in the specific quality of the world you were born into, in the light that was falling when you took your first breath, in the temperature of the air, in the particular position of the natural world at the exact moment you entered it. Jung called these patterns archetypes. And the season of your birth, he believed, is the first archetypal imprint a human being receives, the first frequency the world hands you before you have developed any defense against it, before you have learned to perform or adapt or manage how you appear, when you are still completely open to whatever the world is. This is not about the month you were born in. 12 months divided into 12 categories is a system designed for convenience. What I am talking about is something different. The 4 seasons are one of the oldest organizational principles in the entire history of human consciousness. Every ancient civilization without exception organized its understanding of time, of life, of the human journey around the movement of the earth through 4 distinct phases: the planting and the growing and the harvesting and the resting, the beginning and the fullness and the releasing and the silence, spring and summer and autumn and winter. These are not just meteorological phenomena. They are, in Jungian terms, for distinct archetypal energies, for fundamentally different qualities of existence. And the one that was present at your birth did not just surround you. It entered you. It became the first language your nervous system learned to speak. Before I describe the 4 seasonal archetypes, I want to tell you something about how this works in Jungian psychology that most people never hear, because most content about Jung stays at the surface level of his ideas without going into the actual depth of what he meant. Jung did not believe that archetypes were symbolic or metaphorical. He believed they were structural. He believed they were literal patterns built into the deepest layer of the human psyche that he called the collective unconscious, the layer that exists beneath personal memory, beneath individual experience, beneath everything that makes you specifically you, the layer that belongs not to you alone, but to every human being who has ever lived. And these patterns, these archetypes, do not express themselves the same way in every person. They are filtered through the specific life, the specific wounds, the specific gifts of the individual who carries them. But they are there, in everyone, from the moment of birth. And the season in which you were born determines which of these 4 archetypal energies arrived first, which one was the opening frequency, the first imprint, the one that everything else you are has been organized around. I want you to find your season. Spring is March, April, and May. Summer is June, July, and August. Autumn is September, October, and November. Winter is December, January, and February. Find your season. Hold it in your mind. And now, let us go into what it actually means. If you were born in spring, you carry what Jung identified as the archetype of the eternal beginner. And I want you to understand immediately that the word beginner here carries none of the ordinary connotations of inexperience or naivety or lack of development. In Jungian terms, eternal beginner is one of the most psychologically significant archetypal positions a person can occupy, because eternal beginner is a person who, at the deepest level of their soul, has never lost capacity to encounter things freshly, to see what is actually there rather than what prior experience has trained them to expect to be there, to be genuinely surprised by the world in a way that most people lose somewhere in the process of becoming adults. Spring is the season of emergence, of the thing that was held underground through the long cold returning to the surface, not gradually, with a kind of sudden explosive energy that can feel almost violent in its urgency. The first green shoots of spring do not appear cautiously. They push through the hardest ground with a force that is entirely disproportionate to their apparent fragility. And the person born in spring carries this energy in the center of their psychological life. You begin things with a quality of enthusiasm and genuine excitement and pure forward momentum that other people find either infectious or exhausting depending on where they are in their own cycles. You have ideas. Constantly, the world presents itself to you as an ongoing series of possibilities rather than a fixed set of facts. Where other people see what is, you almost involuntarily see what could be, what has not yet existed, but is trying to, what needs only the right conditions and the right initial energy to emerge. The gift of the spring archetype in Jungian psychology is what he called the green fuse, the biological and psychological force of new life, the capacity to initiate, to plant, to be genuinely present at the beginning of things in a way that the other seasonal archetypes cannot quite replicate. Summer people can sustain what spring people start. Autumn people can harvest what spring people plant. Winter people can hold the silence that makes new spring possible. But only spring people can begin. Only they have the specific quality of energy that is required to put something into ground before there is any evidence that it will grow. But the shadow of the spring archetype is something that I want you to hear with great care, because it is the precise opposite of the gift, and it operates with the same intensity. The shadow of the eternal beginner is a compulsion to begin again before the thing you started has had time to become what it was trying to become. The seeds that are planted and then dug up to check if they are growing. The relationships that are entered with the full force of spring energy and then abandoned when the initial explosion of newness settles into the steady, quieter work of actually building something. The projects that are started with extraordinary momentum and left unfinished not because the person lost interest, but because the energy of the beginning is so much more alive for them than the energy of the middle. Jung called this the wound of the puer eternus, the eternal youth, the person who is so in love with potential that actuality always disappoints them. Not because actuality is disappointing, but because it is different from potential. It is specific rather than open, defined rather than possible. And the spring person, who lives most fully in the space of what could be, sometimes cannot survive the transition into what actually is. The integration practice for the spring archetype, and this is something the content you usually find on this subject never gives you, is what Jung called learning to tend the garden. The planting is not the whole of it. The planting is the moment of contact between your energy and the world. But what comes after, the watering, the weeding, the patient attendance to something that is growing at its own pace in its own time in a direction you cannot fully control. That is where the spring person's real development lies. Not in learning to stop beginning things, but in learning to love the middle of things with something approaching the love they feel for beginning. Because the things that matter most in the human life are almost never found at the beginning. They are found in the long, quiet, unglamorous middle that most spring people have been leaving just before they reach them. If you were born in summer, you carry what Jung identified as the archetype of the sovereign. And the sovereign in Jungian psychology is not a symbol of domination or control over others. It is something far more interior and far more significant than that. The sovereign is the person who has, at the level of their deepest psychological structure, a capacity for fullness, for being completely present in what is, for inhabiting their own life with a quality of presence and warmth and generative energy that makes the people around them feel not diminished but enlarged, not overshadowed, but somehow more visible in the presence of the light. Summer is the season of full expression, of the thing that emerged in spring having grown to its complete form. The sun is at its highest. The days are longest. Everything that the natural world is capable of being. It is being right now, without reservation, without apology, without holding anything back for later. And the summer person carries this energy in their fundamental orientation toward existence. You have a capacity for joy that is not performed, not manufactured, not dependent on circumstances being exactly right before it is permitted to appear. You can find genuine warmth in situations that other people experience as neutral or even difficult. You have a quality of presence that people remember, that makes them feel in your company, that the particular moment they are in with you is somehow more significant than moments usually are. The gift of the summer archetype is what Jung called the generative principle, the capacity to not just experience life, but to somehow increase it, to add to the aliveness of whatever situation you enter. The summer person is frequently the person around whom other people's best qualities emerge, not because the summer person tries to draw these qualities out, but because their quality of presence creates the conditions in which growing is simply what happens. The warmth does what warmth always does. It enables things that cold prevents. But the shadow of the summer archetype is carried in the same quality that generates the gift. The summer person's fullness, their generativity, their genuine capacity to be present and warm and alive in the world, this quality attracts. It draws people toward them. And people who are drawn toward warmth sometimes begin unconsciously to treat the source of that warmth as something that exists for them, as a resource rather than a person, as a sun to orbit rather than a human being with their own winters and their own needs for darkness and rest and a particular kind of silence that warmth cannot fill. Jung documented this pattern extensively in people who carry strong summer energy, the exhaustion of being permanently expected to provide what only the full expression of yourself can provide, the slow depletion that happens when the giving is continuous and the receiving is insufficient, the way that people who shine most brightly are sometimes treated as if their light is infinite and inexhaustible, as if the sun itself does not set, as if summer does not eventually, necessarily, turn into autumn. The integration practice for the summer archetype is learning what Jung called the discipline of shadow, not the psychological shadow in the Jungian sense, but the literal shadow, the part of summer that is not sun, the afternoon shade under the tree, the permission to stop generating for long enough to be replenished by something other than your own warmth. The summer person's development lies not in learning to shine less, but in learning to recognize that the shining requires the resting, that the fullness of summer is only possible because winter happened, that the generative principle cannot sustain itself from its own output alone. It must receive as well as give. And for the summer person who has spent their life being the source of warmth for everyone around them, learning to receive with the same genuine openness for which they give is one of the most difficult and most necessary things their archetype will ever ask of them. If you were born in autumn, you carry what Jung identified as the archetype of the harvester. And the harvester is the most psychologically complex of the four seasonal archetypes because the harvester exists at the most psychologically complex moment of the year. Autumn is a season of simultaneously holding two completely opposite truths. The harvest is the fullest moment, the moment when everything that was planted, intended, and grown is finally, completely available. The trees are at their most spectacular. The colors that the green of summer was hiding are finally visible, and the whole landscape is dying. Both things are entirely true at the same time. And the person born in autumn lives with this simultaneous truth as a fundamental structure of their psychological experience. The gift of the autumn archetype is what Jung called the capacity for depth perception, the ability to see through surfaces to what is actually there, to perceive beauty and mortality simultaneously, to understand that the most vivid and the most meaningful things are often also the most temporary. Autumn people have a quality of attention that other seasonal archetypes sometimes lack. They notice what is about to be lost while it is still present. They are conscious of the value of things in a way that people who do not live with the awareness of ending sometimes cannot quite access. This gives them an extraordinary capacity for appreciation, for gratitude that is not performed or cultivated, but arises naturally from genuinely understanding that this moment, like every moment, will not come again. Autumn people are frequently the most perceptive people in any room, the most attuned to what is actually happening beneath the surface of what is being performed. They read situations and people with an accuracy that can feel almost eerie to those around them. They understand endings. They are able to be present for loss in a way that people who have not integrated the autumn archetype sometimes cannot manage. They do not flinch from what is difficult or painful or final. They have, at the level of their soul's fundamental frequency, made a kind of peace with impermanence that is one of the rarest and most valuable psychological achievements a human being can reach. But the shadow of the autumn archetype is one that I want to name very specifically, because it is the one that costs the autumn person the most and is the least often identified accurately. The shadow is not depression, though autumn people are more susceptible to depression than the other seasonal archetypes. The shadow is a very specific form of premature grief, the tendency to begin mourning things before they are over, to start saying goodbye to experiences, relationships, phases of life while they are still fully present, To be so aware of the ending that the middle becomes contaminated with anticipatory loss. The beautiful meal eaten with the awareness that it will end. The good season of a relationship attended to with the knowledge of how relationships end. The moment of joy held at a slight remove because being fully inside the joy would make the inevitable ending unbearable. Jung called this the wound of the senex in the autumn person. The old man who has arrived before his time. The wisdom that has come at the cost of the willingness to be fully present in what is not yet over. The integration practice for the autumn archetype is what Jung called the surrender to the present harvest, not the memory of the harvest or the anticipation of its ending, to the harvest itself, to the colors that are available right now in their full, extraordinary visibility. The autumn person's development lies in learning to be fully inside the beautiful thing while it is still happening, to let the knowledge of impermanence deepen the presence rather than prevent it, to discover that the awareness of ending, when it is not allowed to arrive prematurely, is not a source of sadness, but the very thing that makes the present moment luminous beyond what people who do not carry the autumn archetype can quite perceive. If you were born in winter, you carry what Jung identified as the archetype of the keeper of the void. And I want to be very careful about how I describe this archetype, because it is the most misunderstood of the four and the most frequently pathologized by people who do not understand what it actually is. The void is not emptiness in the sense of absence. The void in Jungian terms is the ground state, the silence from which all sound comes, the darkness that makes all light possible, the stillness that is not the absence of life, but the condition in which life can be generated. Winter is not the death of the year. Winter is a year in its most interior form. Everything that will bloom in spring is present in winter. It is simply present underground, in the dark, in the silence, in a form that is not yet visible to ordinary perception. The gift of the winter archetype is what Jung called the capacity for depth, not depth of feeling, though winter people do feel deeply. Depth of being, the ability to inhabit silence without filling it, to be comfortable in the unknown, without needing to resolve it into the known. To sit with questions rather than demanding answers, to be present in the dark rather than insisting on turning on a light before it is time. Winter people have an interior life of extraordinary richness and complexity. They think at a depth that other seasonal archetypes sometimes cannot follow. They understand things that have not yet happened because they have spent their lives in the underground place where things grow before they are visible. They are the people who know before the knowing is explainable, who feel the shift in things before the shift has surfaced, who carry a quality of attention to the invisible that gives them access to truths that only become available in the silence that most people cannot tolerate. Winter people are also frequently the most creative people in any community, not always in the most visible or most celebrated ways, but in the deepest ways, the ones that last. The things that winter people make come from a place that is genuinely further underground than most creative work reaches. They have access to the source material in a way that can only be reached by someone who has learned to be comfortable in the dark, who has stopped demanding that the darkness resolve into something immediately comprehensible and has simply learned to be there, in the cold, in the quiet, waiting for what is growing underground to show itself in its own time. But the shadow of the winter archetype is the one that costs the winter person the most across the course of their life. And it is this: the winter person's extraordinary comfort in the interior, in the silence, in the underground place of depth and darkness and waiting. This comfort, which is the source of every gift they carry, can also become a kind of permanent residence. A place they go not only when they're doing the deep generative work that their archetype makes them capable of, but a place they retreat to when the world of surface and visibility and relationship asks something of them that their interior life makes difficult. Connection, expression, the vulnerable act of bringing what has been grown underground into the visible world where it can be seen and evaluated and misunderstood and celebrated and dismissed. The winter person is extraordinarily good at the growing. They are sometimes profoundly reluctant to do the emerging. And this reluctance is not laziness, and it is not fear in the ordinary sense. It is a specific difficulty of a person who lives most fully in a realm of potential, bringing what they are into the realm of actual, of allowing the thing that has been growing in the warm dark to come up into the cold light, where it will inevitably be changed by being seen. The integration practice for the winter archetype is what Jung called the courage of emergence, not the courage of the warrior, which is a courage to face what is dangerous. The quieter and in some ways more demanding courage of the person who has grown something extraordinary in the dark and must now bring it into the light. Not because the light is comfortable, not because the visibility is safe, but because the things that grow underground were grown for the world above it. And keeping them in the dark indefinitely is not the protection it feels like. It is a refusal of the gift's purpose. The winter person's development lies not in learning to be less interior or less deep or less comfortable in the silence, but in learning to trust that what they carry is worth bringing out, that the world above the ground needs what they've been growing underground, that the emergence is not the end of the depth. It is the depth finding its way to become useful. Whatever season you were born in, I want to leave you with the thing Jung believed most passionately about the archetypal life of a human being. He said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who your circumstances shaped you into, not who your wounds required you to become, not the adaptation that kept you safe in the environment you grew up in, but the actual you, the one whose gift is not a compensation for a wound, but a genuine and original quality of presence that the world has never seen in quite this specific form before and will never see again after you are gone. The season you were born into handed you a frequency, a first language, a way of being in the world that is as fundamental to who you are as anything that has ever happened to you since. And the work of your life, the real work, underneath all the other work, is not to overcome that frequency or to manage it or to make it more palatable to people who were born in different seasons. It is to understand it completely, to know its gift and its shadow and its specific integration practice, and to become, as fully and as honestly as you're capable of becoming, the person that frequency was always pointing toward, the eternal beginner who learns to love the middle, the sovereign who learns to receive, the harvester who learns to be fully inside the present before it becomes the past, the keeper of the void who learns the courage of emergence. That person is not a future version of you. That person is you, the one who has been here the whole time. Underneath everything you learn to put on top of it,